The air inside the gilded fork was always cool, kept at a perfect temperature that seemed to match the attitude of the people who dined there. It was one of those restaurants where a single salad cost as much as a week's worth of groceries. The lighting was kept dim so that the sparkle of diamond rings and expensive watches could catch the eye. The walls were painted a dark, serious gray, and the music was usually soft jazz that nobody really listened to. It was just background noise for people making deals, breaking hearts, or bragging about their latest vacations. Alina moved through the dining room like a ghost. That is how she felt most of the time, invisible. She was carrying a large silver tray loaded with dirty plates, balancing it easily on one shoulder. She had been working as a waitress for 3 years, ever since she had to drop out of school. Her feet hurt inside her black non-slip shoes, and she had a dull ache in her lower back that never seemed to go away, but she kept a smile on her face. It was a fake smile, the kind you use when you are tired, but you need to be polite because your rent depends on it. She arrived at table 4. The people sitting there were dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Elena's car. There were 3 men and 2 women. They were laughing loudly, the kind of laugh that sounds a bit too sharp, like they are trying to prove to everyone else that they are having the best time in the world. "Excuse me," one of the men said without looking up. He snapped his fingers. "More water, sparkling, and make sure it's cold." "Of course, sir," Alina said softly. She set down her tray quietly on a side station and picked up a crystal pitcher. As she poured the water into his glass, she listened to their conversation. It was hard not to listen when they were talking so loudly. "I'm telling you, the market is going to crash next month," the man who had snapped his fingers said. He was wearing a suit that looked like it was tailored specifically for his broad shoulders. "I'm moving my money to offshore accounts immediately." "You're always so dramatic, Richard," the woman sitting next to him said. She was tapping her long red fingernails on the table. Let the man enjoy his steak. "By the way, did you see the photos from the yacht party?" Sarah looked absolutely dreadful in that bikini. Lena kept her eyes on the water glass, making sure not to spill a single drop. She didn't care about the stock market, and she didn't care about Sarah's bikini. These people lived in a different world than she did. In their world, problems were things like which country to visit for the weekend or which private school to send their kids to. In Elena's world, problems were things like a broken heater in the middle of winter, or wondering if she could afford to see a dentist about her toothache. She finished pouring and moved.
Oh.
On to the next table. This was her life now. It wasn't the life she had planned. 10 years ago, she had spent every evening in a dusty practice room with a grand piano that was older than her grandfather. She had played until her fingers bled and her hands shook. Her teachers had told her she was a prodigy. They had said she was going to be famous. They said she had a gift that could make people cry. But life has a funny way of not caring about plans. An injury to her hand, followed by the sudden illness of her father, had drained her bank account and her energy. The conservatory accepted someone else. The concert stopped, and slowly, painfully, the piano became just a memory. Something she locked away in a box in her mind to keep herself from being sad. Now, her fingers were used to carrying trays, not playing sonatas. The restaurant was getting busier. The dinner rush was starting. The sounds of clinking silverware, low chatter, and the hiss of the espresso machine filled the air. Alina wiped down a table near the window, looking out at the city lights for just a second. It was raining outside, the water blurring the lights of the cars passing by. She wondered where her old classmates were now. Were they playing in orchestras? Were they teaching at universities? Or were they just like her, trying to survive in a city that didn't care if you had talent or not, only if you had money? A loud crash from the kitchen snapped her back to reality. It was just a dropped tray of glasses. The chef was yelling, as usual. Alina sighed and picked up her cleaning cloth. She needed to focus. If she didn't turn these tables fast enough, the manager would be on her case. The manager, a thin man with a nervous twitch, didn't like Alina. He thought she was too quiet. He didn't know that she was quiet because she was listening to the music in her head. The music that she couldn't play anymore. She walked back toward the VIP section. This was the worst part of the restaurant. The customers here were the richest and often the rudest. They treated the staff like furniture. At the center table, a new group had just sat down. It was a man in his 50s with gray hair and a very expensive watch. He was with a younger woman and two other men in suits. They looked important. Alina watched them from a distance. The man in the middle seemed to be the leader. He was talking loudly, waving his hands around. She recognized him after a moment. She had seen his face on magazines in the grocery store checkout line. His name was Mr. Vance. He was a big deal in the music industry, a producer or something like that. He was the kind of man who decided who became a star and who stayed a nobody. "The music in here is terrible," Mr. Vance complained as Alina approached the table to take their drink order. He had a deep, booming voice that carried across the room. "It's boring. It's safe. It has no soul. Why do we pay so much for a meal if we have to listen to this elevator music?" The other people at the table laughed, agreeing with him just to make him happy. "I'm sorry you feel that way, sir," the young woman with him said, touching his arm. "It's just background music." "No, it's garbage," Vance grumbled. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the walls. "You know, real music is rare. Real talent is almost extinct these days. Everyone thinks they are an artist just because they can post a video online. But true genius? That is gone." Alina stood by the table, holding her notepad. She felt a sudden sharp pain in her chest, like a squeeze. It made her angry, listening to him talk about real music. He didn't know anything. He sat in his tower of money and judged people, but he had no idea what real sacrifice looked like. He didn't know about the blisters, the hours of practice, the tears shed over a difficult measure of music. He just knew about profits and branding. "Good evening, everyone," Alina said, her voice steady. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Mr. Vance looked at her. He didn't look at her face, really. He looked at her uniform. He saw the name tag. He saw the servant. He dismissed her immediately. "Just water," he said, turning back to his friends. "And make sure it's cold." "Don't make me wait," Alina nodded. "Of course, sir. I'll be right back." She turned and walked away toward the bar. She could hear them talking again behind her. Mr. Vance was complaining about the wine list now. Nothing was good enough for him. Nothing ever would be. As she waited for the bartender to fill the glasses with ice and water, Alina looked across the room. There, in the far corner, partially hidden behind a large potted fern, was a shiny, black grand piano. It was mostly for decoration these days. Sometimes on weekends, they hired an old man to come in and play soft jazz, but tonight was a Tuesday. Tonight the piano sat silent under a spotlight. It looked lonely. It looked like Alina felt. The bartender set the glasses down on her tray. "Here you go, Elle. Table 12. That's the Vance guy, right? Good luck with him. He's a bad tipper." Alina gave a small, genuine smile. "Thanks, Dave. I'll need it." She picked up the tray. It was heavy, but she was used to the weight. She took a deep breath and headed back into the lion's den. She had to serve them water. She had to smile while they mocked the very thing she used to love. She had to be invisible again. But as she walked, she couldn't help but glance at the piano one last time. For a second, just a tiny second, she imagined walking over there, sitting down, and playing a chord so loud it would shatter their wine glasses. She pushed the thought away. That was a dream for another life. Tonight, she was just the waitress. Alina walked back to the VIP section with the heavy silver tray balanced perfectly on her shoulder. The water glasses clinked softly, a delicate sound that was quickly swallowed by the loud laughter coming from table 12. Mr. Vance was holding court. He was leaning back in his chair, his tie loosened, waving a steak knife in the air as he told a story. The other people at the table were leaning in, hanging on his every word, laughing at exactly the right moments. It was like watching a play where everyone knew their lines, except for her. She reached the table and carefully placed the water glasses down, making sure not to splash the pristine white tablecloth. Finally, Mr. Vance said, not looking at her. He grabbed a glass and took a long gulp. "I thought you got lost in the kitchen." "My apologies, sir," Alina said politely. "Is there anything else I can get for you right now?" Vance ignored the question. He turned to the man sitting next to him. A younger guy with slicked back hair who looked like he was trying very hard to impress his boss. You see, that's the problem with this generation. No sense of urgency. no pride in service. It's the same with music. Everyone wants to be a star, but nobody wants to do the work. Nobody wants to serve the art. Lena stood there for a moment, invisible again. She felt a familiar heat rising in her stomach, but she pushed it down. She turned to leave, but Vance snapped his fingers.
Wait, he said.
Bring another bottle of that Cabernet, the 2015, and bring 4 fresh glasses. And tell that pianist to stop playing that lullaby music. It's putting me to sleep. There isn't a pianist tonight, sir, Elena said gently. It's just the stereo system. Vance rolled his eyes so hard it looked like it hurt. Great, just great. So we have to listen to robots play music? He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. The other guests quieted down, looking nervous. This was a man used to getting exactly what he wanted, exactly when he wanted it. He wasn't used to waiting, and he certainly wasn't used to being told no. This is unacceptable, Vance grumbled. I come here to celebrate my birthday, and I get silence and tap water. This place is going downhill. I remember when this restaurant had class. They had a real trio back in the 90s. Now, it's a joke. Took a sip of his water and made a face. And this tastes like tap water. I asked for sparkling. Elena bit her lip. She had brought the sparkling water. She had poured it from the distinctive green bottle right in front of him. He was just testing her. Or maybe he was just so used to complaining that he didn't even know what he was drinking anymore. I will bring a new bottle, sir, she said. Don't bother, he snapped. Let's just get the wine. Elena walked away, her heart beating a little faster than normal. She hated tables like this. They didn't just make the night difficult. They made her feel small. They made her feel like her choices had led her here, to be yelled at by a man who had never worked a hard day in his life. She went to the bar and put the order in for the wine. The bartender, Dave, was busy mixing drinks for a couple at the far end, but he nodded at her. He could tell she was stressed. He mouthed, "You okay?" And she gave him a quick thumbs up. She stood there for a moment, watching the dining room. It was a strange, separate world. At the tables near the windows, young couples were on dates, whispering to each other, holding hands over the candles. In the booths, families were eating dinner, parents cutting up meat for their kids. It seemed so normal. But back in the VIP corner, the air was thick with tension and ego. While she waited for the wine, Elena looked at the piano again. It was still sitting there in the corner, silent and dark. The spotlight was off, but the streetlights from outside cast a faint glow on the shiny black lid. It looked abandoned. It reminded her of a horse stuck in a stable, waiting for a rider who never came. She remembered how it felt to sit on a bench. The vibration of the strings humming up through the floorboard and into her legs. The way the ivory keys felt cool and smooth under her fingertips. When she played, she didn't have to be Elena the waitress. She didn't have to be polite to Mr. Vance. She didn't have to worry about rent or broken heaters. She was just free. Order up, Dave said, sliding the expensive bottle of wine across the bar, along with 4 glasses. It was in a fancy wooden bucket to keep it cool. Thanks, Dave, she said. She loaded the glasses onto her tray and positioned the bucket carefully. It was heavy. She took a deep breath and headed back to the lion's den. She could hear Mr. Vance before she even saw the table. He was complaining about the appetizers. Something about the truffle fries being too soggy. Here's the wine, sir, Elena said, stepping up to the table. Vance looked at the bottle, grunted, and waved his hand. Pour it. Elena opened the bottle with a practiced pop and poured a small amount into Vance's glass for him to taste. This was the ritual. The performance. The rich man pretending to know what he was tasting, swirling the red liquid around, sniffing it, sticking his nose deep into the glass. He took a sip. He swished it around in his mouth. He frowned. Everyone at the table held their breath. It's acceptable, Vance said finally. Fill them up. Elena filled the glasses, moving smoothly around the table. She could feel the eyes of the other guests on her. They were watching Vance to see how he would treat her. They were like animals in the wild, watching the alpha predator. Once the wine was poured, she tried to step away again, but Vance wasn't done with her. He was in a mood. He wanted an audience, and she was the only person currently trapped in his orbit. You know, Vance said, swirling his wine and looking up at the ceiling. I was right about the music. It's dead in here. It sucks the life out of the food. The younger man with the slicked hair nodded quickly. Absolutely, Tom. You have such a good ear for this stuff. It's too quiet. It's not just quiet, Vance continued, his voice getting louder. It's uninspired. It's corporate. It's safe. I bet nobody in this entire restaurant knows what real passion sounds like. I bet nobody here knows the difference between a C sharp and a B natural. He looked around the room, challenging the other diners. People at nearby tables were starting to stare. It was awkward. Nobody likes a scene in a nice restaurant. I bet you, Vance said suddenly, slamming his hand on the table again. He pulled a thick wad of cash out of his pocket. It was a roll of $100 bills held together by a rubber band. He peeled off 5 bills and slapped them onto the table. $500. Right now. To anyone in this room who can sit down at that dusty piano and play something that isn't garbage. The table went silent. The slick-haired guy laughed nervously. Come on, Tom. You know nobody here can play. We're at a steakhouse, not a concert hall. That's the point. Vance yelled, That's the joke. Look at them. He pointed a finger at a nearby table where a family was eating. They look at music as something you download. They don't respect it. They don't feel it. He pointed the finger at Elena. I bet you don't know a thing about music, do you? You think it's just noise that happens while you work? Elena looked at the money sitting on the white tablecloth. $500. That would cover her rent. That would pay for a dentist appointment. That would buy new tires for her car. She looked at Mr. Vance. He was sneering at her, waiting for her to say something stupid, waiting for her to just nod and walk away. I know a little about music, Elena said quietly. The table laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was the laugh you make when a child says something silly. Oh, really? Vance mocked. What? You play the radio? You know how to turn on Spotify? She probably plays triangle in the school band. The woman next to him giggled. Vance leaned back, looking very pleased with himself. He loved this. He loved being the king of his little castle, judging everyone and finding them wanting. It made him feel big. Go on then, Vance said, waving his hand dismissively. If you know so much, go prove it. $500. Play one song. If you can actually make me feel something, the money is yours. But if you stink, you have to apologize to everyone in the room for wasting their time. The challenge hung in the air like smoke. The people at nearby tables were definitely listening now. The ambient noise of the restaurant had dropped. You could hear the sound of rain hitting the windows outside. Elena's hands were shaking slightly behind her back. She squeezed them together tight. This was insane. She couldn't do this. She was a waitress. She was tired. She hadn't seriously practiced in months. Her hand injury was better, but it still ached when it rained. And it was raining tonight. If she walked over there and failed, she would be a joke. She would be the laughingstock of the whole restaurant. She might even get fired. The manager hated scenes, but then she looked at that piano again. It was sitting there in the corner, waiting. It had been waiting for a long time. And she looked at the money. $500. It wasn't really about the money, she realized. It was about the look on Mr. Vance's face. It was about the way he talked about art like he owned it. It was about the years she spent in tiny rooms, playing until she couldn't feel her fingers, while people like him decided who was good enough based on connections and looks. She thought about her father. He used to tell her, Elena, music isn't about what you own. It's about what you give. You have a gift. You can't hide it away just because life gets hard. Life had been hard. It was still hard. But at this moment, she had a choice. She could stay invisible, take the abuse, and walk away. Or she could take a risk. Elena took a deep breath. She felt a strange calm wash over her. It was the feeling she used to get right before a recital. The world narrowed down to just her and the instrument. Okay, she said. Her voice wasn't shaky anymore. It was clear. The table stopped laughing. Mr. Vance looked at her, his eyebrows raised. He looked surprised. He hadn't expected her to accept. He was just bullying her, okay? Vance asked. You think you can actually play? I didn't say that, Alina said, looking him right in the eye. You said you wanted someone who isn't garbage. You said you wanted to feel something. She reached out and took the 5 bills from the table. She held them in her hand. The paper felt crisp. If I play and you don't feel anything, Alina said, her voice steady, I will give this money back. I will also pay for your bottle of wine. The table gasped. The slick-haired guy's mouth fell open. The woman stopped giggling. Vance sat up straight. Now he was interested. Now he saw a spark of defiance, and it intrigued him. He liked to gamble. He liked risk, You're on, Vaughn said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Don't embarrass yourself, sweetheart. Lena put the money in her apron pocket. She turned away from the table. She walked through the dining room, but it felt different now. The eyes of the customers were on her. She could feel the curiosity radiating from them. The whispering started. Where is she going? Is she actually going to play? Who is she? She reached the center of the room. The grand piano stood before her. It looked even bigger up close. It was beautiful. A Steinway. It was an older model, but it looked like it had been well taken care of. The wood was polished to a shine. Alina stopped in front of it. She reached out and touched the cold wood. It felt like greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. She thought about walking away. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was a mistake. This was crazy. But then she thought about Mr. Vance's sneer. She thought about the garbage music. She thought about the millions of talented people who never got a chance because they didn't look the right way. Or know the right people. She pulled the bench out. It made a soft scraping sound against the floor. She sat down. The bench felt hard and familiar. She lifted the fall board that covered the keys. The ivory looked yellowed in the dim light, but it was beautiful. The room behind her went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. The murmuring stopped. Everyone was watching the back of the waitress in the black uniform. Alina placed her hands on her lap. She closed her eyes for just a second. She took a deep breath, smelling the faint scent of lemon polish and old wood. She emptied her mind of the rent, the rude customers, the aching feet, and the fear. She let the music that had been locked away inside her wake up. She opened her eyes. She raised her hands. Her fingers curved naturally. Finding the shape they had memorized over thousands of hours, she brought her hands down. Asterisk, the first sound that rang out was not a note. It was a gasp. It came from a table near the window, but it might as well have been from the whole room. When Elena's fingers hit the keys, she didn't press them gently. She struck them. It wasn't a polite, tentative testing of the waters. It was an explosion. The sound that filled the restaurant was massive. It was thunder crashing indoors. It was a chord so dark and heavy that it seemed to vibrate right through the floorboards and up the legs of the chairs. For a second, nobody moved. The bartender stopped shaking a martini. The man cutting his steak froze with his knife in the air. Mr. Vance, halfway through a sip of his expensive wine, stopped drinking. He looked over the rim of his glass, his eyes widening. The look on his face wasn't amusement anymore. It was surprise. Alina didn't look at them. She couldn't. She looked at them, the spell would break. She stared only at the black and white keys, at the little dust motes dancing in the spotlight. Her left hand was already busy, walking down the keyboard in a heavy, rhythmic pattern. It was the sound of footsteps marching in the rain. It was the sound of a heart beating too fast. She had chosen Rachmaninoff. It was a bold choice, maybe even a stupid one for a piano that hadn't been tuned in a week, and hands that were tired. But she needed the anger. She needed the power. She started the second piano concerto, but she wasn't playing it sweetly. She was playing it like she was fighting a war. Her right hand joined in, flying up the keyboard in a rush of notes. It was a waterfall of sound, cascading and crashing. The music wasn't just loud. It was alive. It snaked through the air, wrapping around the velvet chairs and the crystal glasses. It demanded attention. It didn't ask you to listen. It forced you to in the kitchen. The chef yelled an order, then stopped. He frowned. The clatter of pots and pans seemed to slow down as the staff paused to listen. The music was seeping through the swinging doors, changing the atmosphere of the whole building. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It was the main event. At table 12, the laughter had died completely. The young woman with the red fingernails put her phone down on the table. She didn't even realize she was doing it. The slick-haired man forgot about trying to impress his boss. He turned his chair fully around to face the corner. Elena's body moved with the music. She wasn't the stiff, tired waitress anymore. She swayed from side to side, her back arching as she reached for the high notes, her shoulders dropping into the low notes. Her fingers, which had been gripping a tray just minutes ago, were now independent creatures. They knew exactly where to go. They moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. She remembered the pain in her hand, the injury that had made her give up. But as she played, the pain was different. It wasn't a stopping point. It was fuel. She poured every frustration she had into the keys. She played for the rude customers, for the broken heater, for the debt, for the father she missed, and for the dream she had buried. It all came out through her fingertips. The music swelled. It rose to a peak, a frantic, desperate climb up the scale, and then not stopped. Suddenly, the room was plunged into silence. It was a heavy, thick silence. The only sound was the rain hitting the glass windows. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like 3 hours. Mr. Vance lowered his glass. His face was unreadable. Was he angry? Was he bored? Elena didn't know. She took a tiny breath, her chest heaving, and then she let the second movement begin. This part was different. The thunder was gone. The anger softened into something deeper. It was a slow, sweeping melody that sounded like a memory of a love that was lost. The notes trickled out like honey, warm and golden. The harshness of the restaurant seemed to melt away. The cold, gray walls felt warmer. The tension in people's shoulders dropped. Elena closed her eyes. She wasn't in a restaurant anymore. She was back in her childhood living room. She was a little girl again, sitting on the piano bench, her feet barely touching the pedals. She could feel her father's hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. She played with a tenderness that made the music weep. She could hear a soft sniffle from the bar area. One of the customers, an older man sitting alone, had taken off his glasses and was wiping his eyes. Even the cynical bartender, Dave, stood perfectly still, watching her with a look of awe on his face. But the hardest audience was still table 12. Mr. Vance stared at the woman in the black uniform. He was looking for a flaw. He wanted to hear a wrong note. He wanted to see her hesitate so he could go back to feeling superior. But he couldn't find anything. The technique was flawless. The phrasing was perfect. She was handling the instrument like a master. He watched her hands. They moved with a power that he rarely saw, even in the professional musicians he hired for his studios. This wasn't a hobbyist. This wasn't someone who took lessons on the weekends. This was the real deal. The music shifted again. It started to build, growing faster and more complex. Elena's fingers were a blur. The bass notes pounded out a rhythm like a heartbeat racing in panic. The melody danced on top of it, light and fragile, but incredibly fast. The contrast was mesmerizing. It was like watching a bird fly through a storm. People from other tables had turned their chairs around completely now. The dining room wasn't a collection of separate, private bubbles anymore. It was a shared space. Everyone was united by the sound. The wealthy bankers, the young couples, the lonely drinkers, they were all listening to the same story. For the first time all night, nobody was looking at their phones. Nobody was checking their watches. Elena was sweating now. A strand of hair had fallen loose from her bun and was sticking to her forehead. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but she felt amazing. She felt light. It was the feeling of flying. When she played, she didn't have to worry about being polite. She didn't have to smile when she didn't mean it. The music said everything she couldn't say. She approached the climax of the piece. This was the hardest part. The notes came fast and furious, cascading down the keyboard like a landslide. Her hands crossed over each other, left, right, left, right. It required absolute focus. If she missed one note now, the illusion would shatter. She didn't miss. She hit the keys with conviction, driving the music forward, pushing it harder and harder until it felt like the piano itself was going to jump off the floor. The sound filled every corner of the high-ceilinged room. It vibrated in the crystal glasses on the tables. It shook the silverware. Then she began to wind it down. She brought the volume down, softer and softer, slowing the tempo. She played a series of delicate high notes that floated in the air like bubbles. They were quiet, so quiet that people leaned in, holding their breath so they wouldn't miss them. Finally, her left hand played a low, deep chord, and her right hand played one last. Shimmering high note, she held it. She let the note ring out, fading into the silence of the room. She kept her hands on the keys, her head bowed. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly. She was terrified to turn around. The spell was over. The music had stopped. Now, she had to face the real world again. For a moment, there was stillness. The kind of stillness that happens in a forest when a predator walks by. Then, from the back of the room, someone clapped. It was just one person, clapping slowly. Then another joined in. Then a few more. Suddenly, the room exploded. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a roar. People stood up from their tables. The man by the window was cheering. The couple near the bar was clapping so hard, their hands must have been stinging. Even the waitresses and waiters, who usually tried to stay invisible, stopped working to clap. Alina sat there on the bench, stunned. The noise washed over her. It was warm and loud and completely overwhelming. She felt tears pricking the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. She couldn't cry. Not here. She slowly lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. She smoothed down her apron and stood up. She turned to face the room. The spotlight was in her eyes, making it hard to see faces clearly, but she could feel the energy. It was positive. It was amazed. Then she looked toward table 12. They were all standing up. Even Mr. Vance. He wasn't clapping at first. He was just standing there, looking at her. His face had changed completely. The arrogance was gone. The sneer had vanished. He looked shaken. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, or maybe an angel. Slowly, deliberately, he started to clap. He wasn't clapping loudly, but he was clapping with respect. The slick-haired man was cheering, his mouth wide open. The woman with the red fingernails was actually smiling. It wasn't a mean smile anymore. It was a genuine smile of delight. Alina felt a rush of adrenaline that was stronger than any coffee she had ever drunk. She gave a small, shy nod to the room. She didn't bow. She didn't know how to act like a star. She just nodded, acknowledging them. Then she quickly walked away from the piano, as she moved through the dining room to get back to the service station. The customers reached out to touch her arm as she passed. They whispered bravo and amazing and who are you? She kept her head down, her heart still racing. She needed to get away. She needed to be alone for a second to process what just happened. She slipped behind the bar and into the small hallway that led to the kitchen and the employee. She leaned against the cool wall and let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 3 years. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear this time, but from the rush. She looked at her palms. They were red and marked from the keys, but they looked alive. Well, a voice said from the end of the hall. Alina jumped. It was the manager. He was standing there, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked confused. I'm sorry, Alina stammered, the old fear coming back. I know I shouldn't have left my section. The manager cut her off. He uncrossed his arms and shook his head slowly. The table with the big shot. The Vance table. Yes, sir, she said, wincing. I'm in trouble, aren't I? The manager looked at her for a long moment. He had never really looked at her before. He had only ever seen the employee number on her paycheck. They asked for you, the manager said. They asked for you to go back there. Lena blinked. They did. They sent their appetizers back because they were too distracted to eat. The manager said, a weird half-smile forming on his face. Mr. Vance says he wants to talk to you alone. Lena felt her stomach drop. Was she in trouble? Was he going to yell at her for making a scene? Or was he angry that she had shown him up? She didn't know what to expect. But she knew she couldn't hide in the hallway forever. She straightened her apron. She ran a hand through her messy hair. She took a deep breath, trying to find the courage she had felt when she was sitting at the piano. "Okay," Elena said. "I'm going." She walked back out into the dining room. The applause had died down, replaced by a buzz of excited chatter. Everyone was talking about the performance. It felt different now. The air in the restaurant wasn't stiff and cold anymore. It was warm. It was electric. She walked toward table 12. Mr. Vance was sitting down again. He had poured himself another glass of wine. He swirled it slowly, staring into the deep red liquid. He didn't look up as she approached. The other people at the table went quiet. The slick-haired guy looked nervous. Elena stopped at the edge of the table. "Mr. Vance." Vance looked up. His eyes were intense. He looked tired, but he also looked awake. Really awake. For the first time that night. "Sit," he said. He pointed to the empty chair next to him. "Sir, I'm on the clock," Elena said. "I have other tables," I said. "Sit," Vance repeated. It wasn't mean. It was a command, but a soft one. Elena hesitated, then sat down. She felt weird sitting in a chair that wasn't meant for the staff. She felt the eyes of the other guests on her. Vance took a sip of his wine. He set the glass down very carefully. "What was that?" he asked. "It was Rachmaninoff, sir." "Piano Concerto No. 2, Elena said quietly. "I know what the piece was," Vance snapped, but then he sighed and softened his voice. "I meant, who are you, really?" Elena sat on the plush velvet chair, her back straight and her hands folded tightly in her lap. It felt strange to be sitting at the table. Usually she was standing, hovering over the edge, ready to refill a glass or clear a plate. Being at eye level with Mr. Vance made the situation feel dangerously intimate. The air between them was thick with tension, like the calm right after a storm breaks. She looked at him, waiting for the punchline. She expected him to laugh, to tell her it was a decent trick for a waitress, and then send her back to the kitchen. She expected him to humiliate her one last time. But Mr. Vance didn't laugh. He just stared at her, his eyes narrow and searching. The arrogance that had hardened his face earlier seemed to have cracked, revealing something raw and confused underneath. "I asked you a question," Vance said, his voice lower now. He wasn't barking orders anymore. "Who are you?" "I don't mean your name tag. I mean, where did you come from? You don't play like someone who serves salads for a living." Lena swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry. "I'm just a waitress, sir. I've been working here for 3 years. I pay my taxes. I pay my rent. That's all." Alt shook his head slowly, dismissing her answer with a flick of his wrist. "No, that's not all. I've been in this business for 40 years. I've hired thousands of musicians. I've seen prodigies, has-beens, and never-weres. I know the difference between technical skill and soul. What you just did. That wasn't just hitting the right notes. You were angry. You were sad. You were desperate. Where does that come from?" He leaned in closer. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the smell of the steak he had been eating. Because normal people don't play like that. People with safe lives don't play like that. Elena looked down at the white tablecloth. She saw a small stain near her water glass, a drop of red wine that someone had missed. She focused on that spot to keep herself calm. "I didn't have a safe life, Mr. Vance," she said softly. "Tell me," he commanded. Elena took a deep breath. Why should she tell him? Why should she pour her heart out to a man who had treated her like dirt 5 minutes ago? But looking at him, she realized he was genuinely listening. The challenge in his eyes had turned into curiosity. He wasn't mocking her anymore. For the first time in her life, a person with power was actually looking at her, not through her. "My father," she started, her voice shaky. He was a mechanic. He loved cars, but he loved music more. He didn't have much money, but he found an old broken piano in a junkyard. He spent 6 months fixing it up in our garage. He wanted me to learn. She paused, the memories flooding back so vividly it hurt. He worked double shifts to pay for lessons. He sold his own car once, just to buy me a better sheet music book. He said I had a gift. He used to sit on a crate in the garage and listen to me play for hours. He said my music was the only beautiful thing in his hard life. Alina felt a tear trying to escape, but she blinked it away. I got into a conservatory. A good one. I was going to be a concert pianist. But then, my dad got sick. Cancer. It was fast. The table was silent. The other guests, the slick-haired man and the woman, were staring at their plates, embarrassed to intrude on such a private moment. He didn't have insurance, Alina continued. I had to drop out. I needed to work to pay for the doctors for the medicine. I tried to keep playing at night, but he died 3 months later. After he was gone, I couldn't touch the keys anymore. It hurt too much. Every song reminded me of him. So I locked the piano and walked away. She looked up at Mr. Vance. I lost my scholarship because I left school. I lost my dream because I needed to pay the bills. So yes, I play with anger. I play with sadness, because that's all I have left. Vance stared at her. He didn't speak for a long time. He looked down at his own hands, the hands that held the power to make or break careers. He looked at the expensive watch on his wrist, then back at the humble woman in the black uniform. You have a gift, he said quietly, and you buried it. I did what I had to do to survive, Alina said firmly. There is no shame in honest work. No, Vance said. There isn't, but burying a gift like yours? That is a crime. He reached into his jacket pocket. Alina flinched slightly, thinking he might be reaching for money, or perhaps his phone to call security. But instead, he pulled out a small leather-bound card holder. He opened it and slid out a crisp, white business card. It had gold lettering on it. Take this, he said. Alina didn't touch it. She stayed still. I don't want your charity, Mr. Vance. I earned that $500 fair and square. You gave me your word. Vance let out a short, dry laugh. It wasn't mean. It was the sound of a man who was impressed. You certainly did. And the money is yours. I'm a man of my word. But this isn't charity. This is business. He pushed the card closer to her. I run the biggest recording studio in the city. I have connections with orchestras. I know conductors. You said you can't play because it hurts? That's a lie. You've just played better than half the people currently on my payroll. You think you're done? You're not. Lena looked at the card. It had his name, Thomas Vance, and a title, CEO Vanguard Records. Can't just walk back into that world, she said, her voice trembling. I'm rusty. I haven't played with an orchestra in years. I have bills. I can't just quit my job. I'm not asking you to quit, Vance said. I'm asking you to come to my studio tomorrow at 10 a.m. I have a Steinway concert grand in Studio A. I want you to play for me. Just you and me. No audience. No waiters. If you still think you're rusty, if you still think you have nothing left to give, then I will pay you double the session fee and you never have to see me again. But if I'm right, he leaned back, a small smile playing on his lips. If I'm right, we are going to make a record. The slick-haired man whistled low. Wow, Tom. You don't bring people to Studio A often. Shut up, Richard, Vance said without looking away from Alina. Alina stared at the card. It was sitting on the table like a live grenade. It was dangerous. It was an opportunity. It was everything she had ever wanted. Delivered by the worst person she could have imagined. She thought about her cold apartment. She thought about the empty space against the wall where her father's old piano used to sit. She thought about the feeling she had just moments ago, and when her hands were flying across the keys and she felt truly alive. She slowly reached out and picked up the card. The paper was thick and expensive. It felt heavy in her hand. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would you do this for a waitress you met an hour ago? You were terrible to me, Vance sighed. He looked tired. He rubbed his face with his hands, the skin sagging slightly, 'cause I forgot. He said simply, I forgot what it feels like. I sit in my office all day listening to auto-tune and digital beats. I listen to kids who just want to be famous. I haven't heard someone play with their soul in 20 years. You reminded me why I got into this business. He looked at her, his eyes surprisingly soft. I was rude to you because I was bored and cynical. You humbled me, Alina, not with an argument, but with art. I owe you for that. Alina put the card in her apron pocket, right next to the $500. 10 a.m., she said. I might be late. I have to take the bus. Vance actually smiled. A real smile this time. I'll send a car. What's your address? Alina blinked. A car for her? It seemed absurd. But looking at the determination in his eyes, she realized that arguing with Thomas Vance was a losing battle. Or maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop arguing against her own destiny. She gave him her address. Good, Vance said. He clapped his hands together, the sharp sound breaking the spell between them. The heavy atmosphere lifted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the roll of bills again. He counted out $500 and placed them on the table right next to the card. As promised, he said. Alina picked up the money. It felt good. It felt like validation. But the card in her pocket felt like something much more important. It felt like hope. Thank you, Mr. Vance, she said, standing up. Thank you, Alina, he replied. And for the record, you're right. The wine was cold. It was perfect, Alina smiled. A genuine smile. I'll get your dessert menus. She turned and walked away from the table. The dining room was still buzzing, but now it felt different. As she walked past the other tables, people didn't just look through her. They nodded at her. Some even smiled. The man by the window raised his glass to her. The energy of the room had shifted. It wasn't just a place of transaction anymore. It was a place where something magical had happened. She made her way back to the service station. Dave, the bartender, was waiting for her, leaning over the counter with a huge grin on his face. You did it, Elle, he said. You really did it. I've never seen anything like that. I was just scared, Alina admitted, leaning against the counter and letting out a long breath. I thought I was going to throw up. Well, you hit it well, Dave laughed. And you shut Vance up. Do you know how many people have tried to shut that guy up? You're a legend now. Alina looked out at the rainy street again. The lights were still blurry, but the gray world looked a little brighter. She felt a strange buzzing sensation in her fingertips. The pain was gone. The fatigue was gone. She felt like she had woken up from a long, deep sleep. I think I might have made a difference, she whispered to herself. She grabbed the dessert menus from the stack. She needed to get back to work. She still had tables to clear, water to refill, and bills to pay. But for the first time in a long time, the future wasn't just a long tunnel of endless shifts. There was a light at the end of it. A small, gold-lettered light. As she walked back toward the VIP section, she passed by the piano in the corner. The spotlight was still on it. The lid was open, revealing the strings inside. She stopped for just a second and rested her hand on the glossy wood. Good night, Dad, she whispered. She quickly moved on, her footsteps lighter than they had been in years. The restaurant noise, the clinking, the talking, the laughing swirled around her like a song she was just learning to dance to. She arrived at table 12. Mr. Vance was talking to the slick-haired man again, but his voice was different. It wasn't loud and demanding. He was speaking softly, nodding his head. The woman with the red fingernails looked at Alina, with actual respect in her eyes. Alina placed the dessert menus on the table. Here are the desserts, folks. Mr. Vance looked up. He didn't say anything, but he gave her a small nod. It was a nod of equals. I think we'll skip dessert tonight, Alina, he said. I think we've had enough excitement for one night. Just the check, please. Of course, sir. And he added, pausing for a moment. Put the service charge on my bill. And make sure the kitchen staff gets a bonus tonight. The whole kitchen. They deserve it for listening to you. Alina was shocked. A bonus for the kitchen? For Vance, that was practically a miracle. I'll tell the manager, sir. Thank you. Vance stood up, smoothing his jacket. Don't be late tomorrow, Alina. My car will be outside at 9:30. Don't keep the driver waiting. He turned and walked toward the exit, his entourage scrambling to follow him. They looked a little confused, leaving before the cheese course. But they didn't dare question him. As Vance reached the door, he stopped. He didn't turn around. He just stood there for a moment, listening to the ambient noise of the restaurant. Then he pushed the door open and walked out into the rainy night. The restaurant slowly began to return to normal. The conversation started up again, the volume rising back to its usual level. But underneath the noise, there was a new feeling, a lingering sense of wonder. Alina cleared the table, carefully stacking the heavy wine glasses. The $500 was safe in her pocket. The business card was safe with it. She finished her shift an hour later. She clocked out, took off her apron, and put on her coat. She walked out the back door into the alley. It was raining harder now, a cold, steady downpour. But she didn't mind. She hailed a taxi for the first time in 3 years. She usually took the bus to save money, but tonight she felt like treating herself. As the taxi drove through the wet streets of the city, she looked out the window at the passing buildings. She thought about the piano sitting in the corner of the studio. She thought about the recording equipment. She thought about the music still inside her, waiting to be let out. It wasn't going to be easy. She would have to practice. She would have to face the fears she had buried for years. She would have to let herself hurt again in order to heal, but she knew she was going to do it. She was ready to play again. The taxi pulled up to her apartment building. She paid the driver and got out. As she ran up the steps to her door, shivering in the cold air, she didn't feel like a tired waitress anymore. She felt like a musician. She unlocked her door and stepped inside her small, dark apartment. It was quiet. It was lonely. But as she stood in the darkness, a melody began to form in her head. A new melody. One she had never played before. She walked over to the wall where the old family piano used to be. The space was empty now, but she closed her eyes, and she could see it. She could hear it. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled at the ghost of the song. Asterisk, the next morning arrived with a gray, eerie light that filtered through the thin curtains of Elena's small apartment. The rain had stopped, leaving the city's streets slick and reflecting the pale morning sky. Alina woke up not to the blaring alarm she usually dreaded, but to a feeling of tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with anxiety. She sat up in bed and looked at the clock. It was 7:30 a.m. For the last 3 years. This was the time she would be rushing to the shower, trying to scrub the smell of fried food and bleach from her skin before heading back to the restaurant. But today was different. The white business card with the gold lettering sat on her nightstand, next to the glass of water she kept there. It looked like a ticket to another world. She got out of bed and walked to the small closet. She pushed aside her polyester work uniforms and the comfortable jeans she wore on her days off. In the very back, hidden behind a pile of winter coats, was a dress she hadn't worn in years. It was a simple black dress, made of soft cotton, the one she had worn to her father's funeral. It was the only nice thing she owned left from her old life. She took it out and put it on. It was a little tighter than she remembered, and she had to pull her hair back into a strict bun to feel professional. But looking in the mirror, she didn't see a waitress. She saw a musician. At 9:15 a.m., a shiny black car pulled up to the curb outside her building. It was long and sleek, the kind of car that usually only drove through this neighborhood if someone was in trouble. A few of her neighbors, gathering their kids for school or heading to the bus stop, stopped and stared. Alina ignored them. She walked down the steps, her head held high, and climbed into the back seat. The driver was a silent man in a suit, who simply nodded at her and closed the door. The drive to the studio felt like a dream. The city passed by in a blur. They left her neighborhood, with its corner stores and laundromats, and drove into the financial district, where the glass buildings touched the clouds. Finally, they pulled up to a large, modern building with a fountain in front. The sign on the wall read, Vanguard Records. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she walked inside. The lobby was huge, with marble floors and abstract art on the walls. There were no papers on the ground, no smell of old coffee. It smelled like lemon polish and success, she told the receptionist who she was, and the woman's eyes widened slightly, as if she recognized the name from a list. Mr. Vance is expecting you, the receptionist said, handing her a visitor's pass. Studio A is on the top floor. The elevator is to your right. The ride up in the glass elevator made Elena's stomach drop. When the doors opened, she was greeted by a hallway lined with gold records on the walls. She saw names of famous singers and bands she had heard on the radio. It was overwhelming. She felt small again. It's like she didn't belong here. But then she saw the door to Studio A. It was open. Inside, the room was massive. It was filled with expensive-looking speakers, mixing boards with hundreds of knobs and lights, and thick soundproofing on the walls. In the center of the room, bathed in a pool of warm light, sat a grand piano. It was a Steinway, just as Vance had promised. It was black and shiny, looking like a sleek sleeping animal. Mr. Vance was standing next to it, holding a cup of coffee. He was wearing a turtleneck and a blazer, looking more relaxed than he had in the restaurant. "You came," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I said I would," Alina replied, walking into the room. The floor was carpeted, so her footsteps made no sound. "I half expected you to take the money and run," Vance said with a small smile. "Most people would have." Alina walked over to the piano. She reached out and touched the lid. It felt cool and smooth. "I'm not most people," no, Vance agreed. "You certainly aren't. So let's see." No pressure. No audience. Just play. Whatever you want. Lena took a deep breath. She sat down on the bench. It was the perfect height. She flexed her fingers. They felt a little stiff this morning, but the anticipation was waking them up. She closed her eyes. She thought about her father. She thought about the rainy streets, the cold apartment, and the years of silence. But then she pushed all of that away. She didn't want to play the sad music today. She didn't want to play with anger. She wanted to play with hope. She placed her hands on the keys and began. It started slow, a gentle melody that drifted through the room like a breeze. It wasn't a famous classical piece. It was something she had been humming in her head for years, snippets of melody that she had never written down until now. As she played, the music grew. It became complex and rich, weaving together the sounds of the city honking horns, rushing trains, crying babies, and turning them into something beautiful. Vance stood still, listening. He didn't take notes. He didn't check his phone. He just watched her hands. He saw the way she moved, the way she leaned into the piano, the way her face softened as the music took over. He saw a woman who was finally letting go of the heavy bag she had been carrying for 3 years. For 20 minutes, Elena played. She played until her fingers were warm and loose. She played until she forgot where she was. She played until the very last note faded away and the room was silent again. She opened her eyes and looked at Vance. He walked over to the piano and sat down on the bench next to her. It was a tight fit, but he didn't seem to mind. "You have any idea how long it's been since I heard something like that?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Alina shook her head. "My whole life," Vance said. "I've spent 50 years looking for the next big thing. I forgot that the best things aren't things at all. They're feelings." He stood up and walked over to the intercom on the wall. He pressed a button. "Jerry, get in here now." A few seconds later, a man with gray hair and headphones around his neck bustled into the room. He looked stressed. "What is it, Tom?" "We have a session in Studio B in 10 minutes. "Forget Studio B," Vance said. "Clear my schedule for the next month. Cancel everything." Jerry's jaw dropped. "What?" "Tom, you have meetings with labels. Investors, cancel them," Vance said firmly. He pointed at Alina. "We have work to do. We are going to record an album. Just her and the piano. Live. No edits. No auto-tune. Just the raw truth." Alina stood up, her legs shaking. "An album? Mr. Vance, I can't. I have a job. I have rent. I can't just take a month off." "You don't have a job anymore," Vance said simply. "What?" Elena's heart skipped a beat. Did he fire her? "I called your manager this morning," Vance explained. "I bought the restaurant. Well, I bought the building. The restaurant will stay open, but you are no longer an employee. You are now a signed artist on the Vanguard label." Lena felt like the floor had disappeared. You bought the restaurant?" "I wanted to make sure you could focus," Vance said, shrugging like it was no big deal. "I've paid off your rent for the year. I'll handle the bills. You don't need to worry about survival anymore. You just need to play." Lena looked at him, completely stunned. This was too much. It was insane. It was like a fairy tale. Why are you doing all this? You don't even know me. Vance walked over to her and placed his hands on her shoulders. His grip was firm, but kind. Told you, Alina. You reminded me of what matters. This industry, it eats people alive. It makes them cynical. It makes them forget the art. You've been through hell, and you still came out with music in your heart. That is rare. That is precious. And people like me have a duty to protect people like you. He looked her in the eye. Don't let this go to your head. Don't become a diva. Just remember the girl who served steaks and played with a broken heart. That's who we are recording, okay? Alina felt tears welling up, but this time she didn't stop them. She nodded. Okay, good, Vance said, clapping his hands together loudly, the sound echoing in the studio. Jerry, get the microphones set up. Alina, drink some water. We're going to make history. The next month was a blur of activity. Alina moved into a temporary apartment near the studio so she could work late into the night. Every day, she sat at the piano and played. Jerry and Vance would argue over the best takes, and Alina would just sit there, laughing, amazed at the passion they had for her music. When the album was finished, Vance didn't want to wait. He released it online without any big advertising campaign. He just put it out there and let the music speak for itself, and the world listened. It started slowly, a few thousand streams, then a few 100,000, then millions. People were captivated by the story of the mystery waitress who played like a demon and an angel combined. The music was raw, emotional, and honest. It was exactly what the world needed to hear. It wasn't pop fluff. It was real life turned into sound. 3 months later, Alina walked back into the Gilded Fork. The restaurant looked exactly the same, though the staff seemed much happier now that Vance owned the place and had improved their pay. She wasn't wearing her uniform. She was wearing a stylish dress, and her hair was down. She didn't have a tray in her hands. The restaurant was busy, buzzing with conversation. A young waiter came up to her, looking nervous. "Excuse me, ma'am? Can I help you find a table?" Alina smiled. "Actually, I'm here to see an old friend." She walked through the dining room to the VIP section. Sitting at table 12 was Mr. Vance. He was eating a steak, looking grumpy as usual. He was alone. Alina walked up to the table. Vance didn't look up immediately. He was cutting his meat with precise movements. "The service in this place is terrible," he grumbled, not looking up. "I specifically asked for meat. This looks medium. Looks perfect to me," Alina said. Vance froze. He dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the plate. He looked up, and when he saw Alina, his grumpy expression melted into a wide, genuine smile. "Lena," he exclaimed, "what are you doing here? I thought you were in London doing that radio interview." "I came back early," she said. "I wanted to thank you." Vance waved his hand dismissively. "You don't need to thank me. The album is #1 in 5 countries. I should be thanking you. I'm making a fortune." "It's not about the money, Tom," Alina said, using his first name, which she rarely did. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small box. She placed it on the table. "What is this?" Vance asked, looking suspicious. "Open it." Vance opened the box. Inside was an old, rusted wrench. It was clean and polished, sitting on a bed of velvet. Vance picked it up, confused. "It was my father's," Alina explained. "He used it to fix cars. He used it to fix the old piano in the garage. It's the tool that made my music possible. I want you to have it." Vance looked at the wrench, his eyes misting over. He held it in his hand, feeling the weight of it. It was a heavy, clumsy tool, worth nothing in terms of money, but worth everything in terms of meaning. "I don't know what to say," Vance whispered. "Nobody has ever given me anything like this before. You gave me my life back," Alina said simply. This is the only thing I have that's worth giving. Vance closed his hand around the wrench. He looked at the woman standing in front of him. She wasn't the scared waitress anymore. She was a star, but she still had the same kindness in her eyes. You're going to be huge, Elena, Vance said softly. Don't forget us little people when you're touring the world. I won't, she promised. And Tom? Yeah. Try the steak. It really is medium rare, Vance laughed. It was a loud, booming laugh that turned heads in the restaurant. He laughed until tears came to his eyes. I knew it, he said, still chuckling. I knew you were a pain in the neck, Lena smiled. She looked around the restaurant, at the diners, the waiters, the piano in the corner. The piano was silent again, just a piece of furniture. But she knew its song wasn't gone. It was just resting, waiting for the next time she sat down. She turned and walked out of the Gilded Fork. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The streets were busy, full of noise and chaos. But as Alina walked toward the car waiting for her, she didn't hear the noise. She heard music. She heard the music of her own life, finally playing in the right key. And she knew that wherever she went next, whatever challenges came her way, she would always be able to find the music inside herself. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was an artist, and the world was finally listening.